Hi guys. Uh, Excellent. Cool. So we've got some quotes. I'm gonna try sphincters. Totally. This is good. Those are good quotes. I like those quotes. Um, how is everybody doing? Do you guys have questions? Um, Sweet. Okay. First question. In the first segment, when you pick up the Ghostbusters death cannon, which I like that name, that seems exactly right to me, the scientist pointedly says, "You look like you have no trouble killing things." To me, he sounded actually disgusted while pointing this out. Did that register to you, and how did you feel about that? Maybe just a voice acting problem. No, it didn't register. Obviously, it didn't register as much for me as it did for you. But I think it's definitely a choice, a voice acting choice. And to me, it's just reinforcing this idea that I have that Gordon may have started as like this very buttoned down sort of low rank scientist kind of a guy, but he has become, a goddamn killing machine. He is brutal, and I feel for whatever reason, maybe it's because I'm trapped in this space. Maybe it's because there are so many aliens that are clearly alien, that are horrifying, or um, for whatever reason, I don't feel negatively about that in this game the way that I did in Half-Life 2. In Half-Life 2, I felt like I was on such a rampage. I couldn't sort of keep playing. But in this, I feel like yeah, I'm this is what I'm doing is necessary, but it's um, yeah, it's definitely like brutal. It's definitely I'm not meek. I'm not like these other scientists who will just sort of run out into gunfire. Well, I do that, but then I fire back. Um, I missed some health pools. I've definitely missed health pools in the past. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Sometimes I feel like they're placed in ways that are kind of hidden, which may be deliberate. The game certainly wants me to explore space and maybe explore space more than I am wont to do. I will say that in this section, like out in Zen, Zen feels hostile. And my reaction to that kind of hostility in the environment is I don't want to own the space. I don't want to like explore every nook and cranny. I want to get out of there. I had a similar reaction. Even though it's a very different game, I had a similar reaction to Fallout. The new Fallouts, the Bethesda Fallouts. I played Fallout for a little while, and there were some things that I liked about it, but ultimately, like I got to Megaton and didn't want to leave because that world is so hostile. When I'm out in it, and Zen, I feel like when I'm out in it, it's so alien and it's so um, dangerous and kind of angry, like actively dangerous at me specifically. Um, I don't want to spend any longer there than I have to. And so if you put a health pack like right where I can see it, then yeah, I'll snap that up. But if I need to look for it, then I'm probably not going to. And maybe it was right in front of me and I just completely missed it. That happens. I don't know what to say about that. Yeah, yeah. There's definitely like this is a different world, and so all of the kind of visual familiarity that I had with the previous world, which sometimes failed me. Sometimes I couldn't find doors, right? But I knew what a health like panel in the wall looked like. And generally I was able to find health packs and things, most of the time that I needed them. Not in some key times when I needed them, but um, yeah. So I'm, um, do multiple deaths discourage or encourage me while gaming? Oh, that's a good question. Oh, that's a good question. I would say they tend to discourage me more than encourage me. I think there are gamers who are probably more the target demographic for a game like Hotline Miami or probably Half-Life. Honestly, my experience playing the two games is becoming remarkably similar, and I feel like they're both edging me towards the same kind of play style. Um, Even though they feel like very different games, which is weird. Uh, for me, I definitely tend to be discouraged by deaths in a game, and when a game like Hotline Miami, where it's clearly designed around the idea that you're going to die and you're going to die a lot, I am more tolerant of that, I think, because clearly this is part of the design, and this is the experience that I'm supposed to be having. But a lot of the time when I'm playing a game, I'm not gonna quit just every time that just when I die. But I actually think I do get discouraged by deaths, and so multiple deaths, repeated deaths, are more likely to sort of turn me off of a game over time. Whereas I think there are people who find that a challenge, who sort of see that as something that they can overcome and are motivated to try to get past. It's interesting that there are obviously the experience that we have playing games is entirely subjective, but there are very, very distinct ways in which people react differently to the same kinds of games. Talk a lot about getting feedback about the damage that I deal or don't deal to enemies. It seems clear that Half-Life does this poorly, and improved feedback would save me a lot of headaches. The question is, how would you propose to improve meaningful feedback that I get without significantly changing the aesthetic? Oh gosh, I mean, I would say a lot of games will have things like damage states for the models of enemies that take a lot of damage. So just having, honestly, like if we were avoiding being resource intensive, right? Because this is an older game. Clearly, it's using a lot of models. I'm assuming that in 1998, this was like pushing the envelope of what the game could do. So we don't want to go crazy. We don't want to have like, you know, dynamic damage that appears on enemies or anything nuts like that. But having a really really obvious difference between a pristine, untouched, perfectly healthy enemy and an enemy that has been damaged at all would tell me an enormous amount. It would tell me on the first hit that I was having some kind of an effect, or that I had had some kind of an effect. And ideally, you would have that sort of effect staged over time, so that a quarter of the way or a third of the way through defeating an enemy, at the point where I know that I did something to it at one point, but before I start getting discouraged by the number of bullets that I'm firing at it, and start wondering if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, having it change state again would be huge. That's encouragement. That's giving me just some feedback that says, yes, you're making a difference. Telegraphing the state of enemies is something that games do a lot better today than they did back in '98. Uh, Obviously, sort of showing enemies that are injured. And a lot of this is, again, like, Half-Life was, I think, technically at the cutting edge when it came out, and some of these things would be hard to do. But I could also imagine for some of these boss fights where it's really a problem for me. Um, oh gosh. Um, so without changing the aesthetic, obviously we don't want to like have Freeman talking to himself or anything like that. In some of these places, it would make sense to have an ally who's encouraging me, somebody who could sort of give me hints, a scientist who's in a safe room, who's talking to me over a loudspeaker, who says like, "Yes, who just gives me encouragement, right? Like this seems to be having an effect, or you've almost got him, or just keep shooting at him, Gordon." Now, obviously, in Zen, that wouldn't work quite the same way. But I think you've already got, like, this spider has a bunch of different behaviors. Like, it's got a bunch of animations that it plays, and it goes into these different states at different times. And a lot of those states seem like they're kind of random, where it's like, running around frantically or charging. I think it would have been fairly easy to put in some more. Mm, yeah, actually, what I might do is create like a recoil animation, some kind of a like, oh God, you hit me animation, and not have it play every time that you hit it, but have it play like, every 10% damage that you do or something like that, have it play a recoil animation. Because we don't want to interrupt like the attack pattern of the giant spider every time you shoot at it. But it would be really, really nice to periodically get some positive feedback that says, yes, what you are doing is having an effect. Keep doing it. And especially, I got to say, like, I have some sense of the relative effectiveness of my various weapons, but I don't have a great sense. And I got to say that like 6-shooter pistol, the revolver, I can't, like, it seems like it's as effective as the rocket launcher. And it doesn't have as much of a, like, it's doesn't have any area of effect than the rocket launcher does, but it seems ridiculously powerful, and I'm not really sure if that's the case. But when I go up against an enemy, it seems like it'd be really useful to be able to tell in those kinds of stages. Like if I could see every 5 or 10% of damage that I do to an enemy, it has a reaction, and then it takes me, 50 bullets with the machine gun, but it only takes 1 bullet with the revolver, then now I have a sense of like how much more powerful one gun is compared to another. So those are the kinds of things that I feel like would be really useful. I'm not talking about like Borderlands style, having numbers fly out of enemies or anything like that, giving them health bars. I don't think any of that is necessary, but I think there are definitely things that you can do just to give feedback, any kind of feedback. The player is going to interpret that. Like if you give feedback in a patterned way, the player's going to be looking for it. The player is like desperate to know, am I doing damage? So any kind of feedback that you give is probably going to be interpreted as you're doing damage. Yeah, keep going. What happened to the game telegraphing resources, or this is a safe zone to explore for stuff? I mean, I think it was still doing that towards the end in Lambda. There were a bunch of big open spaces in the Lambda complex that were sort of frightening, but there were a bunch of like really super safe rooms that were like storerooms that had like all sorts of ammo and stuff. They seem to be they came pretty frequently, and they were really well stockpiled. So I feel like that's kind of been going on through the whole game, more or less, and maybe it even picked up towards the end. Obviously, nothing in Zen feels safe. Um, it's just a very different kind of environment, and that seems very intentional. Personally, I like having safe zones every once in a while, and clearly, when the environment is too hostile, I miss things. So I would not have objected if they had gone for a different experience and put places in Zen that made me feel a little bit safer. But clearly, that's not what they were going for. They wanted this to feel like a really alien, uh, anxiety-ridden world. Um, do I wish there was more vocal interaction with the NPC characters? I keep talking to them almost in an anthropomorphizing way, and I seem disappointed when the guard doesn't talk to me as though I expected to be welcomed or revered as their savior. Oh, interesting. Do I? That's not a behavior that I'm entirely aware of. So it's interesting that you would call that out. I mean, obviously, I'm talking a lot about the power complex that I feel like Gordon has, and/or I feel like I have as Gordon. Um, but I don't necessarily expect the characters in the world to reflect that any more than they already do. I think just giving me the fact that they've been watching me, that's enough. That's enough validation of my God complex to sort of um, keep that going. Uh, the I talk at them. This is interesting. I'm trying to dissect. Uh, I talk at them like personally, like me, Sean, talking to the computer. Uh, I talk at them partially because I'm on camera, because I'm streaming, and so I'm trying to engage vocally with the game, and a lot of the time that's me talking about level design or talking about like what's going through my head. When I'm talking to characters, when Gordon is in a room with characters, me vocally engaging with the game is going to be talking to those characters. It's going to be verbalizing conversation with or at those characters. That I think is just natural. I think that's sort of always going to happen when you're in a case where somebody is trying to verbalize their experience the way that I'm doing. But I also I do that to some extent even when I'm not on camera, uh, and I'm trying now to think um, to quantify how much I do. I don't know that I actually talk out loud very often, at least. Um, but these are definitely they're not. These aren't like things that I'm making up saying just for the stream. This is me sort of verbalizing the kinds of thoughts that I would be having, even at just like in if I was playing the game. If I was just playing the game, it's not obvious to me because I'm not like fully conscious of it. I guess that I'm talking as though I expect to be treated a certain way. Although, I mean, sometimes I do feel I find the way that the characters talk to me is a little bit wooden, is a little bit stilted, is a little sometimes it's like absurdly understated, and so I that's funny. I find that funny when that happens. But a lot of that I think is a product of the time. Like this is the amount of voice acting that they could do, and this is a lot of story, frankly, to put into a game like this. Um, so me wanting or expecting more subtlety to it, is asking more than the game is really prepared to deliver. Uh, but the fact that it comes off as though I expect to be revered is interesting. I'm gonna have to, if there are more interactions with characters, I'm gonna have to sort of keep an eye on that, just to see how much I do it just unconsciously. It's interesting. All right, watching you play has been a throwback of nostalgia with the first time I started playing first-person shooters, and I'm quite proud of the progress that you've made in such a short time. Are you going to be playing other classic first-person shooters after your playthrough of Half-Life? Um, I'm sure that I will. I think I'll probably take a break from first-person shooters for a little bit right away, and I'm not going to be like playing exclusively classic FPSs or anything like that. But I don't object to them, and especially ones that I haven't played. We were talking on the forum just today or yesterday about the original Deus Ex, which I never played, and I had a lot of trouble getting into. So I don't know if I would want to do it on a stream, because that might just be painful for everybody involved. But the old Thief games I never played, and I'd be really interested in playing, I don't know, Thief or Thief 2, something like that, trying that out. Other classic FPSs, maybe System Shock 2. I'd be interested in. I never played that. Some of these are really long games, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to handle that in the future, especially for classic games like that. But I don't specifically object to playing any of that, so I'm sure that it will come up again at some point. How do you feel about the transition to Zen? It seems sudden to me, as though you've skipped a chapter of exposition, traversing scientific labs, and then suddenly space, open terrain, no direction on where you're going. Yeah, no, it's very sudden. I think it's deliberately sudden. I think it's meant to be disconcerting. I mean, like, a lot about Zen is deliberately alien, strange, and the sudden change in. I love that you've identified the transition from sort of mostly narrow corridors to mostly big open spaces. And that that skybox just kind of like highlights the fact that you're out in the middle of space, whereas previously just being outside has been a pretty rare thing. Yeah, like that's a big shift. That's a very dramatic change. That's a contrast in the level design and the style of play, the kind of exploration that you're doing. And that contrast, because it happens so suddenly, is very disconcerting, and I think that's extremely deliberate. It heightens the sense of alienness that you have for Zen, and for me, it also heightens the this sense of hostility that I get, because I'm not only under attack all the time, not only does the world look completely strange, and parts of it will hurt me, and I'm not always sure which parts of it those are. But I'm also, I feel out of sorts. I just came from this weird place. Like, I came from a completely different place, and now I'm in this totally weird place. The part that felt rushed to me was actually like immediately before we traveled to Zen, when we like walked into that last little safe room, and the scientist was like, okay, you don't owe us anything, Gordon, but you're the only one who can go to Zen and defeat this alien badass. That felt like pretty sudden. Like, holy shit, wait, so this is the first I'm hearing of us actually having a stable portal that we send people through, and now you want me to go? Okay, yeah, all right. But that came on really fast. So, and that I think, again, this is part of like them creating a disruptive transition, but maybe because that's dialogue, because there's like a sentence there or a scientist there that I'm talking to, I sort of expect a little bit more social interaction. Like that doesn't feel like how social interaction would go. And some of it is because Gordon is completely silent, so it's not really social interaction, it's being talked at. But yeah, I found that a little interesting. That was weird. Um, can you describe your experience exploring Zen in more detail? It seemed to me that the game did a great job presenting the new world in a way which felt extremely foreign, forced you to explore in a sort of scientific way. You had to experiment repeatedly with your environment, determining what was alive and what was not, what was interactable, what was attacking you, in order to make any progress. How did you feel about this? I think you nailed it. I mean, I don't know that I have a lot to add to that, actually. Like, I've said that I think it's deliberately designed in a way that makes it feel foreign, that makes it feel alien. And I think I hadn't identified how scientific you have to be, how experimental you have to be to sort of figure out your environment. But I definitely did that. I walked around and like, identified that the little light plants were reacting to my proximity, but they didn't seem to be dangerous, and there were other things that were hurting me, and trying to figure out which things were hurting me, trying to figure out how far I could jump with the long jump, and just like that transition into Zen was really interesting to me because it seemed like here is the whole place, here's the whole world, there's nothing there. And um, because it was so obviously empty, unlike the place where I am now, which is similarly sized, right? The place that I ended, it's approximately the same size as the island that I started on. Like once you got down to the island, but there's a bunch of stuff on it, and so it's much more cluttered. It's much more confusing trying to figure out where am I supposed to go, because there's lots of different things that I could be trying to interact with, and lots of different ways that I could be trying to go. Whereas that first island was so empty, the question was sort of like, well, it doesn't seem like there's anywhere to go. So where do I go now? And it didn't take me, relatively speaking, it didn't take me that long to figure out, well, the only place that I haven't explored, the only place that I can't see is underneath the island that I'm on. So can I get down there? I thought that was really well done. Like, I thought that was really, really nice. It leads the player to sort of make that kind of discovery, but you're exploring a space that feels so different than any of the Black Mesa spaces that you've explored so far. Like that kind of traveling underneath the lip of something is not the kind of, exploration that I would have done anywhere else, I think. What's the primary thing from a modern first-person shooter that would have improved Half-Life the most? This is a tricky question. This is kind of a trick question, because obviously Half-Life is beloved. It's a game that a lot of people feel very strongly about, and have a lot of nostalgia for. It's also a foundational game. It's a game that sort of pushed the envelope at its time, and has been built on in innumerable ways since then. Definitely one of the things that I feel like I'm consistently missing is this sense of feedback for how well I'm doing in the boss fights. In in especially like the boss fights where I have to actually like just shoot weapons at something for a long time until it eventually dies. Um, that's I've tripped over that repeatedly. Um, the only other thing that I've really had trouble with, I think, is there are moments when the I would have appreciated a little bit more signaling towards where I'm supposed to go next, because I would get stuck on kind of puzzle platform or platformy puzzles, um, where it just wasn't clear to me that this is a path. This is a place that I'm supposed to go. I'm thinking about, and they're not always platforming, but they're like exploration of space kinds of puzzles where it's not clear. It's not clear. It wasn't clear to me, you know, what I should be looking for, I guess. And so that kind of signaling I would have appreciated in a few places. And that doesn't have to take the form of like a big yellow arrow over your head pointing in the direction of the next mission objective. Uh, I think that a lot of it can be done environmentally with either level design cues like lights and colors, or actual, didactic cues like signs or audio messages, people who are directing you towards specific things. I'm thinking about that mech that I got stuck on for a long time. If there had been a scientist who could have like told me what the steps are that I needed to do, then I was just looking in entirely the wrong place, and I thought that I thought that all I had to do was flip that one switch on the whatever generator that I flipped, and then like it wasn't clear that there was a second step to that, and I was in entirely the wrong place. And so I think there's a lot of ways that the game could have signaled me a little bit better towards, hey, you're not done. There's another thing that you need to do. And also, this over here is a way that you can and should explore. So that kind of thing, I think probably. A lot of the mechanics are good, and they're not necessarily my favorite mechanics. I like shields, like rechargeable shields. I like when you get your health back in a game like this. I like those kinds of things, but they change the feel of the game. And this is a game that is not about those things. I would not like force them on it. The the ladder, a lot of the physics, actually, a lot of the physics is really rough. If I could improve one thing, it might be the physics, which I think a lot of that is maybe problems that were introduced by the source port. So there you go. I picked the wrong version of Half-Life to play, but that's something that's like really actually janky. A lot of like the gunplay, I think, is it's not friendly in the way that a game that has some auto aim to it would be friendlier. But that's not. That's as much an aesthetic choice as it is like an accessibility decision. And I'm not going to demand that every game have that. I think that it's totally valid for a game like Half-Life to have the difficulty aesthetic that it has. I don't feel like the guns are just bad. And granted, I don't play a lot of first-person shooters, so I don't have a lot of like. I'm not coming at this from an experienced place, but yeah. I'm just, a lot of the time I'm bad at them. But I have clearly gotten better at a lot of things over the course of the game. So that's exactly what the game is supposed to do. That's what's supposed to happen. I'm not going to knock that. um, It's funny to hear me talk about the Gonarch animations because its frantic running around is precisely an indication for the damage that you've done. Every time you just do a certain amount of damage, it runs around to a different place. Otherwise, it doesn't move. Yeah, and actually, like, I mostly got that, and it was working pretty well. Doing damage on the Gonarch is not the biggest problem that I've had. Doing damage on tanks and things and the helicopters and like those were much more problematic for me, partially because I now have done this so many times. I've fought boss monsters, and hi, yeah, you like to stand on my desk out of the camera range. What? No, come on, go down or pose. Do something. Um, Maybe because I've gotten used to how those kinds of fights will go, and definitely like it does have more feedback, but yeah, and so maybe this is giving the lie to everything that I just said, but it's once we have a little bit of feedback is better than no feedback. A lot of feedback is better than a little bit of feedback. Okay. There's the part with the teleporter where I accidentally ran in and found myself back at the beginning of the utterly ridiculous clockwork puzzle. Given the way that scenario was designed, do I feel like this instance of trickery was intentional on the part of the designers? And what would it accomplish? If so, that felt like a maze. And actually, so not just a maze, but a particularly cruel kind of maze because your sense of direction doesn't help you. Even if you could maintain a sense of direction, it wouldn't help you. I don't think it was terrible because it was quite short, and because I have mastered the quick save. And this is definitely a game. And it's been a long time since I played a game that I felt like relied so heavily on the quick save system, but this one does. And I probably, in 1998 would have come into this game more in a frame of mind where that would seem extremely natural. Whereas today, games that I play that have quick saves are like, that's great. I use the quick save, but I use the quick save like occasionally, and I use it like before I go into what appears to be a big boss battle or something like that. I less use it like every time I jump onto a new platform, because yes, I made it onto that platform. Whereas that level was kind of a is this progress? Can I tell that this is progress? If this is progress, then let me quick save here because I'm definitely going to go the wrong way somewhere else. It's just inevitable. I think that mazes have gone out of vogue, and I'm judging this honestly mostly from interactive fiction. In the early, mid, maybe even late 90s, maze puzzles in interactive fiction were still something that you could kind of get away with doing. And this is basically like text adventure games like Zork, along those lines, where in order to really get through a section, you pretty much have to like draw it out as you go and map the way that you're going. It's a maze. That has gone out of fashion hard. If you include a maze in your interactive fiction today, then you will get a pretty harsh reception from the interactive fiction community. And I think that's true, that's representative of a general trend in games. I think there was a time when it was more acceptable. I'm thinking about, for example, King's Quest 5, I think, is the one that has the desert. Similarly, Quest for Glory 2, adventure games have a thing with deserts. These are, just like vast expanses of essentially the same screen repeated over and over again, that there are a couple of notable features in, that things that you need to get to. And you kind of just need to keep wandering out until you die and mapping the way that you go until you've built up a map of the whole maze. Yeah. The labyrinth in King's Quest 6 was actually a little bit of a departure from that, because it gives you at least some form of a map in the manual. So I think that this was kind of Half-Life's token maze puzzle. And it was done in a really interesting way. And it felt like a very Half-Life way, actually, with all of these rotating platforms and cool science-y, teleporter things. And it was mercifully short. But it's still a maze, and I think mazes have gone out of fashion for a reason. I think they're not that fun, and yeah. So that's basically what I have to say about that. Is that I think it was deliberately confusing. I think that it made it pretty obvious pretty quickly that that's what. Well, no, it didn't. I take that back. At first, I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. It didn't, it didn't make me do too much before it made it obvious that it was going to be a maze. And then at that point, I sort of knew that I could use the quick save to shortcut it quite a bit. But yeah, it was a maze. It was a maze. Okay, maybe two more questions. What other subjects should a game designer absolutely take courses in? Cinema, literature, art history, psychology, gender studies, education, business. Oh. That's a really good question. It depends on what you want your career to be. A game designer depends on where you are. Game designer is a very, very nebulous term as a job description or as a job title. At a big company, at like a AAA, a game designer probably is a fairly low-level position. Somebody who's doing system design on specific subsystems, like mini games, or somebody who's doing level design, or somebody who's doing some other sort of relatively small self-contained aspect of the design. The people who design the entire game have titles like creative director. Obviously in smaller companies or in like indie studios or one-man teams, the game designer is fulfilling that role, that creative director role. So if that's the kind of position that you want, if that's what you're talking about, then the game designer is kind of the director of the project. And what is helpful is to have at least a passing understanding of all of the different pieces that you need to deal with. you want to at least be able to speak to the people who are going to be working with you. So having a sense of visual aesthetics, of color theory, of representation, having a sense of programming and systems design and software engineering, having a sense of audio and audio design, sound effects, music, um, uh, having dabbling in those fields. You don't need to be expert in any of them. You don't even need to be like really a competent producer in any of them, but you do need to sort of know the fundamentals of them so that you can get a whole vision of the project. Then all of the fields that were listed: cinema, literature, art history, psychology, gender studies, education, business. I think those are all extremely useful. I also think that if you are going to be a game designer, especially if you're looking to be an indie game designer, if you're looking to make your own games, then pursue some courses that are outside of things that are obviously connected to games, because one of the biggest things that you need as a game designer, as somebody who's creating their own IP, is experience, a broad range of experience in different fields. So this is a question about courses of study, and that's totally valid and that's really important, but I'm going to jump off of it and talk just about life experience. If you want to be a game designer, then like go out and do things, experience things, find things that you're passionate about that have nothing to do with games, because the games industry is pretty insular, and that can be a problem. And a lot of the games that people make, a lot of the people who enter the industry because they love games, and specifically they love playing games. And so they focus very heavily in their studies and in their free time on games. They play games, they read games media, they immerse themselves in games culture, and that's all fine. That's all good stuff to do to like keep abreast of what's going on in that community. But if that's all that you do, then the games that you make are just reactions to the games that already exist, and they can be either in a lot of ways clones of games that already exist, or they can be particular sorts of you know, overturning. Gosh, my mind has gone totally blank. But subversions. They can be subversions of tropes and games that already exist. But regardless, they're going to be reactionary. They're going to be like reactions to games, and they're going to exist entirely within the culture. Whereas the really interesting games that you see coming out, especially indie games, the really interesting indie games tend to come from people who aren't who have passions outside of gaming, because you draw on those other things. And so I would say things like archaeology, architecture, history, even languages, like language courses can be really useful, not because they're directly applicable, but because they're really generally applicable to coming up with ideas. and like coming up with like interesting original ideas and figuring out ways to connect them and bringing new things into games. Um, so that's immediately where my mind went. In terms of like subjects that are useful for games, I think all of these are absolutely true. Um, the only one that I might add to that is audio design and or like music theory or something like that. And uh, possibly architecture. That's a little bit sidetracked. Um, sorry, and computer science. Some kind of computer science. Again, you don't need to be like a master programmer, but um, having some kind of experience in computer science, and especially you don't need formal education in it, but formal education helps. Um, Having some experience in computer science does two things for you. It lets you talk to programmers and understand what they're saying because they often speak in their own, very jargony kind of language, and know things that are like technically feasible versus not technically feasible. And The other thing that it means that you can do is you can prototype your own designs, and that is enormously useful because you're not relying on everybody you're not relying on like a programmer to just get your basic ideas out in system. If you can do that yourself, then that's extremely useful. Okay, I know I said I was going to do another question, but that might be my last question, because I've talked a long time about that. Thanks, guys. This was fun. This was really exciting. I'm glad to be back doing this again. If you haven't been reading the forum, go check out the forum, undefinedbehavior.com/forum. Pretty sure. And there's been a lot of really interesting conversation going on there. I am planning to stream again on Saturday at 6 o'clock. And I am hoping to finish Half-Life at that time. So if you haven't put in a vote for what the next game is going to be, you will find that at the forum, and go ahead and do that this week, because after that it'll be too late. Sweet. Awesome. Oh yes, there's going to be, again, check out the forum, there's going to be an event on Sunday. Thanarod is hosting a stream that sounds really interesting. He's going to play classic games and have some group discussion about them. Which, with this group, I think that discussion will be really interesting. Check the forum. I forget exactly what time he settled on for that, but that will be on Sunday. I'm going to try to make it. Sunday is a work day for me, and it's not always. It's not easy to plan when that's going to end. Sometimes it runs really long, and this week it's possible it's going to run really long. But if I'm back home, then I will join in for that stream. 8 p.m. Pacific time, it sounds like. So go to the forum to see details on that and check that out. But I will be doing another play-by-play on Saturday. I hope to see you then. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a good night, have a good day, whatever time it is where you are. All right, I'll see you next time.